Hi, this is Paul. This last week I made this video, Transformational Mystical Experiences Are More Common Than You Think. And I sort of laid next to Karen Wong's conversation with Gavin Ashenden, where he talks about the kinds of experiences that led him into a religious transformation, with John Vervaeke's conversation with Rick Repetti, which led him into a religious transformation. This word transformation is sort of the term that we're using in this little corner of the internet for significant individual changes in perspective. After a transformation, we see the world in a different way. We respond to the world in a different way. We react and engage the world in a different way. And we probably will do so in community, or either in formal conscious communities or in more ad hoc communities that are around us, or in the communities that we find ourselves embedded in for other reasons. But part of what we're chasing in sort of this wisdom crisis, meaning crisis space, is transformation that will lead to ultimate betterment. Now, by saying that, I just now set out when I'm going to release this video, because when I'm making these videos, inside of me, they're development that sort of progresses along a pattern. And so I have to pay attention to pace and sequence a little bit, which is unusual to say with this video, because what this video is, I did something I almost never do. I edited video, and it's not real fancy editing. There's no things going in and out and fades and anything like that. It's pretty much sort of reaping and looming, as Grim Grizz would say. But I reaped mostly from stuff that I'd been working on, and now this is sort of a loom together. Part of what I've been playing with lately has been live streaming. And I sort of call these things Thief in the Night live streams, sort of riffing on Jesus' second coming. And when I find myself with a little bit of space in my schedule, I'll drop into the Bridges of Meaning Discord, because that's a place that I can reliably find people who are conversant in a number of the topics that we've been discussing here, and I can have ad hoc conversations with them. And to one degree or another, because of my status now via these 4 years of making YouTube videos and the size of the channel, et cetera, and I think also the quality of the individuals that have gathered in the Bridges of Meaning space, I can drop in there and semi-reliably strike up conversations that are fruitful and engaging and push me further. And so the other day when I was doing this, I thought, it wouldn't, because of sort of the way I've set up my office. This is just a little corner of my office, and my main computer is over there, and I'm often over there if I'm engaging in the Bridges of Meaning open studio or something like that. I can just hop over here, go back into the Discord, pull these people into a smaller room, and have a conversation. Now, in this case, unlike the purely randos conversations, I sort of know what's on the other end, and I'll only do this if I find that, okay, we've been doing some things that I find to be productive. So then I'll invite or group people into a much more limited room, slide into there, reinitiate the conversation. And often with a reinitiation of a conversation, there's usually a little bit more development as well. So I did 2 videos this week that were essentially that, and I'll continue to play around with this practice. As I've said before in my channel introductory video, this whole thing for me has been one giant laboratory of knowledge. And my YouTube channel, the Bridges of Meaning Discord, the local meetups, estuary. And for me, Bridges of Meaning Discord is an estuary. I think there are many different estuaries, not only estuary groups that self-identify as estuary groups, but Bridges of Meaning Discord is very much for me an estuary, because it's a place where Christians and non-Christians, people who are into psychedelics, people who are more opposed and skeptical of psychedelics, can sort of meet together and have productive, meaningful conversations. And so that's really where Bridges of Meaning Discord has come in. Now, I know from the comment section that some of you have been banned from it for not playing nice in the estuary. There is a group of moderators that meet together regularly to discuss bans. So if you were banned and you're ready to confess your sins and promise to play nice again, you can make your appeal. But I'm not in charge of that group, and that's intentional, because one of the things that right away I said with respect to estuary and this concept is that I didn't want to become a bottleneck. I would rather have an ecosystem of things developing, and I am by no means smart enough, nor omniscient, nor have enough time to manage a variety of ecosystems. So I would rather sort of fertilize and encourage and promote ecosystems rather than control them. So anyway, back to the point of this video. The first section of this video is going to be the relevant section of the Vervaeke-Repetti conversation. And unlike what I usually do with the, whoops, dyslexic me, with the box up here, I can't quite, there we go. With the box up here where I sit here and I watch the video with you, I'm just going to throw the video in there, okay? And so I'm just going to let it run. There's not going to be any interruptions. And I know some of you out there, if you made that comment, you're probably not watching this video. One of my repeated favorite comments on my commentary videos is, "You keep interrupting the video." Yeah, that's what a commentary is. And unlike a print commentary, we have the text above and maybe the notes below, or a study Bible. I do it sort of interstitial. So if you ever want to watch the whole video, which usually has 10 or 100 times more views than my little commentary, you go watch the whole one. In this case, I'm just going to let it run, and it's going to be full screen, and it's going to be there. And then I'm going to take some of the salient points out of these two little thief in the night ad hoc conversations that I was able to reap from the Bridges of Meaning Discord, and that's going to be this video. So some of you will have seen all of this material before, in which case, well, click away if you don't want to watch it again. But for me, because this conversation is linear and developmental, I can sort of keep track of the different pieces of it. And because I look at the analytics, and I know that certainly I can't expect everyone to watch all my content. I'm putting out just so much content lately. There's stuff you might miss, and for that reason, I'm going to put it together. And this is probably leaning me towards finally being able to do some more summary things. And maybe at some point this will get me more into writing again. But that writing takes a lot of time. So anyway, that's what this video is. It's sort of a summary of a bunch of things that you might have missed. I also don't know if YouTube promotes live streams in the same way that they promote just posted videos. Now, those of you who have been watching the channel for a while know I tend to post at the same time each day. At least I try to post 5 days a week. Sometimes it's all 7 days, but it's usually 6 a.m. Pacific. I will post some new content if I have new content. And there's a rhythm to that, and that's helpful for a lot of people. The thief in the night things usually happen when I have a little bit of time, and I can't predict when that will be. Maybe I finished writing my sermon and I need a little break. And so for me, the break is dropping into the Bridges of Meaning Discord and seeing what's going on there. It might mean lurking. It might mean showing up. So that's part of these live streams. I've thought about having more live streams during the week. We always have one Friday morning at 10, which I'm actually recording this right before I do that live stream. Rick is ill this week, which is a terror. Rick has once again gotten a day job, which makes me a little sad, but I encourage him because I think it's good for him. And so he's once again gotten a day job, and he actually went into an office, and after he came back from the office, he was sick. And so he says, I demand hazard pay, because Rick wasn't seeing a lot of people. I used to tell him, if threaten him, if you give me COVID, and he says, if I get COVID, it's because of you. So that's my little relationship with Rick. But anyway, so I'll be running the Friday live stream myself. I know that for people in Australia, 10 a.m. Pacific is not a convenient time for you. But I'm continuing to play with that. Maybe there'll be another time during the week where I run a live stream. Maybe it'll be formatted a little bit differently. But I like sort of dropping into the Discord server and finding out what they're talking about and harvesting their insights and sharing them with you. So that's what this video is. And I hope it's productive for you. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment.
I mean, you had what I would call a higher state of consciousness that led to a transformative experience. You have this experience, it's of the really real, it's more real than somehow your everyday existence, and you transform your life, right? You transform your life, you take up philosophy, you do and you build and you reorient to come into right relationship with that, which is exactly what that's what a transformative experience is. And so first of all, being able to talk to somebody with your astuteness about this directly is very exciting to me. Did you have like a single experience, or did you have several of these experiences that were like that?
Multiple. It got to the point where, yeah, I mean, I was meditating like 4 hours a day. I would sit in meditation sometimes and be gone, like samadhi, kind of disappear, and come back, and thought it was 10 minutes or something, and it was 4 hours, this kind of thing. I was maintaining consciousness sometimes through falling asleep, this lucid thread of awareness that I'd go to sleep, I'd be in these altered states all night, lucid dreaming, kind of out of body astral travel-y, kind of very, like some of those, just to me, I know the terminology of lucid dreaming is when you know that you're dreaming without waking up. That's the standard interpretation. But I would like to have another word, and I don't want to just use the same word because everybody takes that word to mean that. But there have been dreams that are so real and so lucid in the ordinary sense of lucid.
Yes.
Brilliant, clear, like what's that word? Ontonormative that you use.
Right.
They have such a reality to them that they seem more real than the waking state. I've had a lot of those, and I call them lucid because I don't know what else to call them. But
no, I understand.
Like lucid 1 and lucid 2. But I've had a lot of precognitive dreams, like really, like I think I mentioned, multiply precognitive dreams. I've had those kind of transcendent samadhi-like experiences.
Yes.
I have all kinds of, weird psychic phenomena, senses of telepathy, seeing people's energy, almost like psychedelic experiences,
Yes.
But when once I started doing this, I stopped taking drugs and all that. I did acid and stuff like that, and peyote and all that. In the first, I did do that. Actually, I should say that there was a short period after I got into meditation where I was still doing that stuff.
Right.
But then at a certain point, I just, I flipped and said, "Nah, I got to stop doing that. This is better." What was one of my meditation teachers quoted some Indian guru who said something like, "Drugs are like plastic grapes and God is the wine," or something like that. And like, you hear these phrases and that just something clicks. And I thought, and then Ram Dass's guru. Ram Dass was one of my teachers, by the way. I studied with him.
Wow.
Because he was a part of my Sangha for a few years in New York City. That group, that first teacher that I found, maybe 6 months, 6 months into my going to her weekly meditations, I finally talked my best friend into coming, Barry, real hippie, acid freak kind of guy at the time. I finally talked him into coming after he read, Be Here Now, because I carried that book around like it was my Bible. The first time he came, Hilda wasn't there. Ram Dass was there in her place. He's like, "Oh, Hilda's not feeling well. She asked me to, substitute for her." And Barry was like, "Oh my God, this must be the right place, because we got Ram Dass." So, but Ram Dass, and after a short period of time, of being in the group, there were all these little private group meditations going on, the splinters, that private little sanghas in one of the teachers' basement for like the elite followers or whatever. We jokingly called them the God Squad. But I wound up getting right into all that in a short period of time. And I had Hilda, Ramdas, and another woman named Joya, who was very, very spiritually advanced person. She was like a walking ball of psychic energy, or what do you call it? Shakti or chi, or depending on your tradition. I lost my train of thought. I forgot what question I was answering. Did I have just one? No, it got to the point where 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I was in an altered mystical kind of state.
Right.
For a few years. And it got so bad. I mean, I was in my late teens at that point. And then what happened, this is this interesting thing, because you'll like this story. Ramdas had been with the group for a few years, and he had a falling out with the other two teachers, particularly with Joya, who, according to Ramdas, wanted to induct him into tantric training.
Oh, I see.
And Ramdas felt like he was sincere about it, because he's gay, and he thought he's always been uncertain about his sexuality, and he thought maybe this would be good for him. And he tried it, but he thought that she was more human than tantric in the experience. I'm paraphrasing what he wrote about this publicly.
Wow.
When he left, he wrote an article called "Egg on My Beard" or something, because he felt bad because he brought all of his students to Joya and Hilda, and then he left. When he left, the other two teachers were pointing the finger at each other, and Hilda said, yeah, it's Joya. You know, she's kind of like, she got the power too quickly. She's kind of like Darth Vader or something, you know, too much power, not without spiritual evolution enough, you know, her ego is still there. And so they were all pointing fingers, and they separated. And to me, I was with them for a few years. My life had been radically transformed. I mean, I really felt like one of the apostles with Jesus.
Wow.
For years. And then as if there were three Jesuses, and they got a divorce.
Oh boy.
It was horrifying. And I didn't know what to do. And I kept wanting to be with all three of them. Ramdas stopped being a teacher. He would give an occasional lecture in a public forum, and I would go to that. But I kept going to Joya's meetings, her separate little meetings, her Sangha, satsang, we call it back in the Hindu name is satsang. The community of Satya is truth, you know, the community of truth seekers. So, and I kept going to Hilda's, but then Hilda didn't want me to go, because I was one of her close people, and like there was no love lost between them, and they were, well, Hilda was vilifying Joya. Joya was not vilifying anybody. But so I was like that kid who's like, I'm not going to decide between my parents. But then Hilda at one point challenged me and said, look, if you keep going to Joya's, you can't come to the private meetings. You could only come to the open one at the church once a week. So I went there a few times, but after a while, I just didn't like that whole scene. And it was a horrific loss of support for me. And even though ideologically and philosophically, I've always revolted against this idea that I read mostly in these, you know, contemplative traditions, that you need a community. Because I had such a bad experience with community, I like resisted that narrative whenever I come across it. But on reflection, just recently thinking about it and having a discussion with someone else like you just the other day, I realized that I went through, which I didn't mention yet, I went through a kind of dark night of the soul, really like negative, supernaturalistic, psychic, you know, mystical experiences after I lost the connection with the satsang, with the Sangha.
Sounded very traumatizing.
Yeah. And I was, you know, I was in my late teens, I don't know, 18, something, 19, I forget the exact age, but I had all that. It was like I was completely psychically open, like my chakras were wide open. I was very sensitive, but I had no supports.
Right.
And so all of a sudden I was having all these negative spiritual experiences. And it really felt like I was waiting for myself to have stigmata or something. Like I felt like I was being attacked, you know, because I just didn't have, prior to them splitting up, I was in a Garden of Eden kind of state.
Right,
Like
right.
all the time I was so in the flow, everything was so natural and connected. And then it just became very alienated. And I had a lot of weird overnight dreams. I felt like I was battling demons and everything. It just got too freaky for me. And I had some symbolic moments, like I had this one dream that was lucid, not, I wasn't awake, but it was actually my lucid dreams are almost both senses of lucid in that period, because I would be awake. I'd be conscious during the dream. And I knew that it was an altered reality. I knew I wasn't in the waking world. So it was lucid, but it was so normal for me that it didn't hit me like, oh, I'm in a lucid dream. It was all the time for me.
Yeah.
But many of them were so lucid, they were lucid in that second sense of more real than real. And in one of them, I was climbing up this tower, this wooden shaft, very high, and I knew that it represented my spiritual ascension. And the higher I went, the thinner it got. It was wood, and it was being blown about by the wind, and it was rickety. And the higher I went, the more dangerous it was. And I was almost at the top. And I knew if I went any further, the whole thing would collapse. And so I just turned around and went back down. And after that dream and a couple of other things like that, I had a whole bunch of these kind of, noetic, omen-like insights that let me know I was playing with something that I was not equipped to play with. I did not have the right skills. I didn't have the right development. So I decided, I had a bunch of clues like on what I could do. And I remember, what's his name? Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda's teacher in the 1800s. I don't know if the Vedantist.
Yep.
I remember him. I remember reading that he smoked cigars or cigarettes or pipes or whatever to keep him in his body. Right. That was one clue. And somebody else, some Buddhist, shaman guy told his student that you need to eat meat or something because, you're too imbalanced or whatever. And, so there was a bunch of these clues, and I just decided I did this intense sadhana, spiritual work that brought all this on, opened me up. I've got to do like a reverse sadhana.
Right.
To shut it down. And that's what I did. So I started smoking, and everything I gave up, I brought back. So then there was another period of my life where I started doing everything again. Right. And that was fun. It was like being born again in the flesh, rather than born again in the spirit. It was like going from a black and white world into a colorful world. Like I had ignored what in the two worlds ontology, I was not in the lower world for years. But I was happy to come back to that world. And then I kept all I kept was my yoga practice, my mantras, 2 mantras that I've been doing. One is like the Jesus prayer, or from the church fathers, Kyrie eleison, and Om Mani Padme Hum, the Tibetan daily mantra. Ram Dass had taught me that, like he initiated me in that, and gave me a mala and all this kind of stuff. And put me into samadhi. I had a phenomenal experience, just me and Ram Dass once. But like I kept what I thought would sustain me, because I knew I needed to keep my spiritual practice. But what would shut down the chakras and all that, whatever all that other stuff was, I just tried to avoid anything that would, like certain kinds of pranayama practices, like chi cultivating practice. I eliminated all of that. I just kept a simple mantra, which I could do throughout the day, while I'm jogging or whatever, doing anything, and my mindfulness thing, which guess who taught me that? He was a member of that same group, Danny Goldman.
Oh, wow. You've known a lot of the stars, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, Danny's name back then was Jagannath Das. He was one of, him and Ram Dass had the same guru, the little old man in India, Maharaji, named Crowley Baba.
Oh,
so Danny was in our satsang back then, and he taught me mindfulness. So I thought, yeah, that's kind of clean and simple. And there are places where you could go, like insight meditation, whatever, where it's just, there's no guru thing involved. Like I was averse to gurus.
I can see why.
Anything Hindu, theosophical, anything that sounded like that, I just avoided it. I wanted something like Zen, but I didn't know any Zen. you know, other than just, you know, whatever I could do on my own, you know, Zazen or whatever, but I didn't have any teachers, but I knew how to do Vipassana. And so I've been doing that for decades as my primary practice, and yoga.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, when you were doing it, you reminded me of Hessa's Siddhartha.
Yes.
Very much, except you lived it.
Yeah.
So
no, I was going to say that, but I don't know if you would remember that scene, that part of his life where he stops being a samana and becomes a worldly guy. Yeah, that image I got from him about color coming back.
Right, exactly.
In this world, in World One.
That was one of the two books that really opened me up in my late teens.
Me too.
So do you still have do you still have mystical experiences or transformative experiences, or are you in a place where that's no longer something you seek or that comes to you? Or so what's like usually people do this and then they go down and then they learn to sort of do this, like right, integrate. Where are you at with respect to that?
Yeah, I've been reluctant to open any of those floodgates.
I can imagine.
Ever since that happened. So I have a good practice. When I'm more steady in my practice, you know, my practice goes up and down.
Of course.
But I do yoga virtually every day, and I do various different kinds of little meditative things every day. And if you've been a multiple decades practitioner, meditation infuses a lot of your life.
Of course.
When you're washing dishes or what, no, you know, so many different, but I also sit and, but when my sitting practice gets a little deeper, I go deeper. But even if I'm only sitting for 20 minutes sometimes, or a half hour or 40 minutes or whatever, I'll go in the zone where it's a Gnostic place, where my philosophical concerns don't matter to me at all.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing.
I know.
And when I come out of it, I'm like, I feel great. I feel connected. But then this skeptical philosopher addiction of mine comes back, and I'm like, okay, how could I, you know, how do I integrate that? That's why I'm writing all the stuff that I'm writing, because I'm hoping that just by keep delving into this and talking to other people like you, and you know, that this will grow. But I do believe that I'm moving back. I'm starting to feel confident and mature enough that, okay, I was a kid, I had a libido, I had an ego, I had all kinds of stuff that I didn't know about, like that you say, like 99% of what we do is not consciously calculated. You know, but like I feel kind of grounded enough to where I'm not so worried about that anymore. But I'm very busy, so I don't have time to meditate 4 hours a day. But I am moving in that direction.
So I made the video. I released the video this morning where I sort of did a mashup with the Rick Repetto conversation with John Vervaeke. That Mark's, when he saw that, he immediately sent me a note and said, "You have to watch this video, because this video has everything to do with what you're doing." And I thought, then I watched the video and I thought, it was the, you know, he was watching yoga on TV and bang, he had a, you know, do we call these mystical experiences? He had a out-of-body experience, and that was all interesting. I thought, yeah. And then he got to the other end where his little yoga church broke up, and where he decided to leave all of his practices entirely and re-enter his body and take up smoking and eat meat and have sex with women again and all that stuff. And that whole transformation thing I found interesting, and I juxtaposed it with Gavin Ashenden, who had just released a video about a conversation he had with Jordan Peterson at Cambridge. And what I thought was interesting about those two sides were, here you have Gavin Ashenden, who also told Karen about a near-death experience that he had prompted by drinking too much alcohol, and you know, it sounded very similar to Rick Repetto's experience. And so then I riffed on those two things and brought in the Paul Kingsnorth thing. Very nice, Luke. So Luke's our first grader with show and tell. Here, carrots, peppers.
1, 2, 3.
Sam, brought to you by Coke. What's that, Luke? Is that
That's bacon fat.
bacon fat? Oh, so I was going to do a second part today, and Mark says, well, you'll hit my point in the second part. And I pretty quickly realized I wasn't going to hit his point in the second part because I didn't know what his point was. So Mark, brief, then Mark told me what his point was. And then Manuel said what he heard from Mark, which was a little different from what I heard from Mark. So why don't you go ahead, Mark, and give a little brief summary of what you see the second point is in this conversation about the mystical. And, everybody's all excited about the mystical now. Oh, I want to be a mystic. But, we're talking about the limitations of that.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. A lot of people refer to these as transformative experiences. And one thing I realized a little over a year ago now, being on the Vervaeke server and talking about these things, is that they're not transforming. They're just having profound experiences. Like they're having something, and more real than real. However they describe it, there's lots of descriptions for it. But they're the same jerks they were afterwards in many cases. Now, Rick Petty's case, obviously not, right? He actually did go through transformation, but then he transformed back, right, in the story, to your point. And it gets me thinking about, because I've been around hippies. I used to live with hippies. I love them dearly, even though I've always wanted to murder all of them for various very good reasons.
Now I'm going to get demonetized by YouTube.
A few of them. Look, sometimes when you live with people, especially people with no boundaries, it is difficult to get along with them because, but then what happens with no boundaries is they think they can, have these experiences and that they're making sort of progress or changing when they're not. And I think part of the reason why is because they have a local container, a community. Right. And that's what Rick Ripetti was talking about. It's got this local community's got Ram Dass and these other, semi-famous, mystics, or however you want to couch them, right? Gurus, whatever you want to say, from India, right? Lived in India. And then the community breaks up and he doesn't have another community to go to because he doesn't have a larger container outside of that would hold him. And this is one of the great problems, I think, with transformation is you need a larger container than your even than your community to hold you, right?
Than your local community
to go towards. Yeah. So there's a proximal container of your local church, and then there's the larger container of, in the case of Christianity, Jesus, right? There's the Jesus container, which is bounded by the Bible. The Bible gives you the balance for that container. And then when your local container blows up, your pastor has an affair, which didn't happen in Ripetti's story, but it sounded like there was a little bit of potentially sexual scandal that caused that whole community to break apart, right? I don't know that it was. I'm not making any claims. I wasn't there. I don't know the guy, right? But tantric practices tend towards the sexual, not that they are sexual at all. I'm very familiar with them, their connectedness, roughly speaking, but they tend towards the sexual for whatever reason. And it sounds
Mark
like that's what
community grew up. Tantric expert. Yeah, you can add that in your next introduction.
No, not at all.
On the tantric experience.
No, not an expert on a tantric experience. But I mean, you can hear that in reports from, say, movies, music people and movie people and whatnot who have done this, right? They talk about Tantra and how it was great and all that, but it never lasts, right? And they don't have a larger container either to orient with these things. And so when you have these experiences and then your community breaks up, or you have these experiences and then it doesn't go anywhere, you end up in an apartment in New York for a month protesting, right? Or whatever John Lennon did, right?
Right.
Like, but then you go to Strawberry Fields. So my uncle and I went recently. We went to the ELO concert in New York City, and we were like, "Hey, we got some time. Let's walk up to Central Park." And we happened to be near the part where Strawberry Fields is. He walks up there, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not impressed." And I was like, "Really?" Because he kind of grew up with all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't last, right? It doesn't because there's no larger container past your community. There's no larger container to have things in.
Well, and what struck me when you were mentioning this, Mark, was, so I've been thinking, I've been trying to get the language around, I call it dead reckoning, Peterson deals with it with once you have something that's sort of aspirational, you sort of pull yourself up to it. So there's proximal betterment, and for people who have what language are these mystical experiences? Are these transcendental experiences? They're pre-modern, let's call them pre-modern experiences. I mean, all these kind of things that are very much upper register with very little connection, experiential connection to the lower register. So then people have a transformation. And, in Rick Rapetti's example, there was it was all upper register, and he was trying to connect it to lower register type stuff. But you need to have really sort of a local container to sort of heighten this, stabilize this. Somebody just sent me a long email where they went through all of, a whole bunch of experience that they had, it was drugs, and it was trouble with the law, and it was issue with the parents. I mean, lots of people have those kinds of things. But, so we really need sort of a proximal container to sort of stabilize these things and gel these things. But I think you're right, Mark, that when that blows up, you very much begin to see the need for far larger containers. And that's why people start, Buddhism, you just use that word, Buddhism, but especially here in the West, that sort of means people who want to be spiritual but not Christian with a little bit of formation. But you're right, in terms of, Christianity, that's where you have the emanation, where you have the Jesus up above. And so what then tends to happen is you have the emanation from above, which then connects up down below and allows people to sort of stabilize and connect these experiences. And because they're also transcendental in that way, that's where you'll begin to actually get some lower level development that builds up and sort of stabilizes everything, and you can actually develop something of a civilization. Without this, without all of these, without any of that process from below, you're pretty much just stuck with these experiences that are just sort of ephemeral, and off they go, and they're gone. And, I think when you look at something like AA, which came up a fair amount in the comments section, you have the grounding of the group and the sponsor and the storytelling at the group and the meetings, but then you also have the big book and the tradition, and all of those things sort of allow the thing to settle. And then, once you get into something as large as a civilization, you really sort of need a world religion size environment to actually create all of the dynamics to fill in the world. So that's what I heard from Mark. So what did you hear from Mark, Manuel?
Well, I'm not going to go do my commercial thing, because that's the private stuff. Like, I need to make the profit from it. But what I heard is like you have the container, right? Like I like to call it a worldview, and this worldview is the thing that allows you to place everything connected to each other, right? Like, because not only containers of groups blow up, but sometimes people blow up. And like when a people blows up, they need to get themselves out. And when they blow up, they're in a community or whatever goes for their community, right? So the community did not prevent that from happening, right? So you always need that extra thing to pull yourself out. And well, I have personal experience in this regard, but it's important to have a path back to intelligibility, to reestablish hope, faith, trust in things. We've been talking about that a lot lately, and here's where Vivek is right. Like, if you start placing that in a person that's living, then they're always going to let you down in some way, right? Like, they're unable to hold this forever because they're not perfect. And so it's important to have this transcendental aspect in your worldview that is able to be maintained across your experience.
Anybody else have something they want to jump in with that? Because I thought that was a really helpful point.
So, Rod Dreher on his American
I will make a
Conservative-
note. Someone in the chat said it's the 3 introverts and the 3 extroverts on a panel. I thought that was pretty funny.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one that makes me. So Rod Dreher had a post about psychedelics on the American Conservative, and like, does Rod Dreher watch your channel, Paul? Do you think, or is he lurking somewhere? Because either there's some like really strong convergent thought going out there in the world, or it's not actually convergent. It's actually he's just drawing from a similar well. But like, so this is the article's mostly about psychedelics. Here's and he wrote it, let's see, this is December 3rd, so 4 days ago. I repeated to Nikki my usual claim about psychedelics, that I suspect they really do work to open the doors of perception in ways that don't usually happen to people except after long ascetic disciplines. Therefore, they're like people who win the lottery versus people who become millionaires after years of hard work. The lottery winners don't normally know how to handle the money and often ruin their lives. I thought that was a pretty good analogy. And then there's this paragraph, which is like, anyway, I'll just read it. So yet after my conversation with Nikki yesterday, I believe that we are certain to see a big jump in spiritual seekers turning to DMT in search of transcendence and re-enchantment. I believe as a matter of faith that Augustine was right. Our hearts are restless until they find rest in God. We are created for fellowship with him, and as spiritual creatures, we crave experiences of the spirit. I have major theological differences with Pentecostals and charismatic Christians, but I'm 100% on their side in terms of their recognition of the importance of the participatory experience of God and worship. In Orthodox Christianity, I believe we have worked out a good balance. The Orthodox writer Frederica Matthews Green told me that many years ago that she was at an ecumenical conference once and observed during the break time that the Calvinists and the Catholics bunched together on one side of the room to talk doctrine, while the Orthodox and the Pentecostals bunched together on the other side to talk about worship. So that's the end of that quote, which sounds like, honestly, I'm like, Roger, are you watching my conversations with John Vervaeke? Because that's almost exactly what I talked about with like how the four Ps relate to, different sort of denominational specializations, I guess you could say. So I thought that was interesting. Another thought that I'm having, like Pajot and Bishop Barron, when Jordan Peterson was sort of pushing them on the psychedelic thing a little bit in the Four Horsemen video, were very much sort of like spiritual experiences come, but don't seek them out, don't dwell on them, hold them with an open hand, let them go, and like very kind of negative, I would say. Negative, skeptical, not completely dismissing, because obviously maybe saints and monks and that sort of thing might experience a higher degree of these things than the rest of us, and they might occasionally bring their wisdom back down to us, but definitely don't seek them out and stuff like that. Whereas me, coming from, one of these charismatic sort of backgrounds that Dreher might have been talking about, I think that there is value in these experiences in themselves for the believer in terms of offering enchantment. And like Dreher said, we are spiritual creatures that speak experiences of the spirit, and that's part of who we are in our image of godness. And so I thought that Pajot and Bishop Barron were a little bit too negative, really, on what I would say the perspectival, and in a way that Jordan Peterson didn't find very satisfying. And that I think that we're going to need better answers to these sorts of questions from the DMT enthusiasts than what was offered to Jordan Peterson, when he was really seemingly earnestly asking and wanting something of an answer from people that he respected in the Christian tradition. And I don't think he got the answer that he was hoping for from either of them in that conversation.
Well, what do you think? Oh, do you want to talk, Luke? You unmuted.
Yeah, I did. Well, so I think that, there's a lot of things to say. Like, many people have said that the Vervaeke 4 Ps are tough because they're just one of the downfalls, and he would acknowledge this, I think, and a lot of people would, is that they're only separated and shown to emphasize things to be able to analyze and talk about them, but really they should all be one thing. And then to the point of a lot of this stuff, I think you need to distinguish between, here I go, the difference between a experience from an individualist kind of isolated me and my own subjective world, and then an experience that is communal in orientation. And this is where I would say, Sam, like even your, like a charismatic religious experience, I would almost equate that to like the exact same thing as a psychedelic experience, because you could experience both of those like individually in your own prayer closet, or you could do it communally where you all get together with a bunch of close friends and take some mushrooms. And those things can be transformative. I think the correction should always be is that they're not prescriptive, I think, because of the whole unearned wisdom thing. And oh shoot, what was one of the other points that you were talking about? I had one other thing to say. Yeah, I don't, an experience in and of itself, I guess this is the thing that I would say, my understanding from within Orthodoxy and just how I take it is an experience should not be pursued in and of itself and can be useful like a proposition can, but it's never the thing in and of itself. Like you can have tons of experiences, but divorced from transcendence and community and other people, like if they're not, if that experience is divorced from all of those things, it's going to be more deceptive than transformative.
This is probably the rare subject where I'm more wooey than Luke.
Well, you know, I love the example of, let's say, I still got to schedule my talk with James Wellman and Tripp, because, you know, my theory has been that when you have like big box charismatic worship, which, you know, I've done my share of taking cheap shots at it with, you know, the skinny jeans and the smoke machine and the guitar and the lights, that's there, you know, that is a transformative, something parallel to, you know, frame breaking, but it's also communal. I mean, when you have thousands of people, even if they're singing love songs to Jesus, and they're doing it together, I mean, that for many people, part of the reason the American megachurch is working, and what I mean by working, it's at least it's functional in terms of its capture of the attention of millions of American Christians, is in fact that transformative experience. And people will tell you that experience is transformative. Now, any pastor also knows that those experiences are ephemeral in that they disappear. And so, and, you know, I knew a guy who was a CRC.
Your memory is something, you know, the
True.
The full qualitative experience disappears.
Right.
But the memory lingers on, just like how you can remember a dream after you woke up, but it's not quite the same thing as being in the dream itself anymore.
But what we go ahead, Manuel.
Well, the thing that we focus on or started focusing on is setting a container, right? So I think what's happening is there's a container setting, right, and then you open the space. So what you're doing is you're taking people out of their daily lives and you're introducing them into a sacred space, and then there's a sacred element because people are gathered there. But then there's also a sacred element in the fact that you're enacting with the same purpose, and so now we have the space open, right, and that's not a transformation, right? Like that's an affordance, right? Like it allows for potential to manifest, and then, well, like what is the spirit that's being invoked in that situation, and what is our relationship to that spirit? Like, are we letting that spirit inform us, or are we just consuming the spirit as a participant to have a good time, right? Like, so now we get into what is our intention, what is the way in which that we're participating in this openness. And like you can see the analogies all over, right? Like, so, oh, like in circling, people come in and they have this feeling of intimacy that they don't have anywhere in their lives, right? This was literally what Viveki said to Peterson. And it's like, yes, right? So there's this affordance. They're like, oh, right, there's all of this potential. Now they can't handle it, right? Like they don't have a interface with the potential that allows them to transform themselves as a consequence of what's actually available to them. And I think that's where the box is. Like, okay, like how do we get people to actually transform in the right direction? And now we got to talk about the good. Like, what's the good, right? Like, how do we relate to the good? Like, how do we understand the good? Is the good the thing that Sensei says, right? Like the teacher, like, oh, are we going to follow a person, or is the good something that's transcendent, right? Like that's being passed down through a tradition, and I'm just going to go with the tradition and not with whatever the teachers say.
Well, and how common is the good? Because if the good is common to your local group, but it's not common outside your local group, and the group blows up, your entire identity, your entire worldview is gone. And that's the problem. Whether you're talking about spiritual experience, and Sam, I totally disagree with your characterization of Bishop Barron and Peugeot. And actually, I did a breakdown on the meaning code. We're going to do another one with Karen Wong on the Four Horsemen conversation, right? And I'm not actually even against taking psilocybin, but I'm completely no on drugs because I've seen a lot of people take drugs in good containers with guides. The person has a bad trip. The person has a bad trip, and the guide is ruined for life because they couldn't prevent the bad trip. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
It happens. I've seen it many times.
That's what's blowing up churches, because a priest scandal, someone deconstructs because they had a bad experience. In the pitch PVK, someone put in an idea talk about childhood trauma and deconstruction. That'd be an excellent topic. So to your point, Mark, yeah.
Right. And so you can see how this is the same, whether it's a sexual scandal or a profound experience, right? Or just the disintegration of a community, or a situation like Manuel's talking about, where you go into something like a circle. So a circle is usually temporary. I mean, maybe it's a group of people you know. We've done some experiments on the Vervaeke server with it. I'm not a big fan. The guy Sangstock was on. He talked to us about circling. You can listen to that on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord YouTube channel. It's kind of interesting because it doesn't give a lot of information, I would say, but it's very telling in other ways. I think what all these things have in common is they lack this larger structure, this larger container, right? And what we were calling it earlier, the Jesus container, right? The container where everything is, because I don't think people take transformation seriously enough. In transformation, what you're doing is you're taking your current worldview, or at least significant parts of it, and you have to kill them. You have to let them go. You have to destroy them. When you're doing that, you need support. And then when you're transforming, you need to know, are you transforming for the better, or are you turning into something worse? Because it's not clear, right? And then once you get there, you still need to reestablish your transformed self. You need something bigger for that. And just to round it out, also the container needs something for that. You can't reform the container if the container isn't sitting in a wider thing. So when you talk about things like contentional communities, that's a self-referencing thing. You want a community that references a common good that's common not only to your community, but to all humans. So that if your community goes through a problem, or if it has a problem, or if it becomes corrupt, you have a reference point outside of it that you can orient towards, that you can fix it relative to. Like, that's why the larger,
like the Babylonian king having the Babylonian god above the Babylonian king, right? It's
exactly.
But that always has to be. To some degree, that's always going to have to be ineffable and only ever seen in the personal things, because otherwise, which is why I think in Christianity it's made to be love. Because if you make it something else, it'll turn into a utopian ideology every time.
But that's why it's so tricky. So Rick Ripetti talks about this, and you can watch Vervaeke's absolutely giddy the whole time, right? He says, oh, I had to reground everything. And then Vervaeke's just, oh, yeah, you had to reground everything. again, you're not rising above the container. Like maybe that container could have been fixed. Maybe that could have been repaired even after the damage that was done, had they a larger container to orient against and fix against. The only reason the container blew up for Rick Ripetti, according to his story, from my understanding, is because there wasn't any way to fix it. Everybody went off in different directions and it splintered because they didn't have a larger container to reference.
How do you maintain fidelity with a larger container besides just saying it? How would that look?
Worship.
Right. It looks like the Christian church. I mean, I think
it's worship. That's
the
how you maintain relationship with the
But it's easy to say that. But the last 500 years of the Christian church have shown that Christ and Antichrist kind of go hand in hand.
It's sacrifice, right? Like you sacrifice for the container. Like people. I thought of it like a month or two ago. Like sacrifice is a virtue. Like you need to learn to sacrifice.
There's a lot of people who would agree with everything that you're saying, and all their relationships and churches and marriages are falling apart.
Sure.
So
you're welcome.
So what?
Welcome to peopling.
Yeah. Well,
I know
your doctor smokes and is overweight. I mean, this is people,
right?
And but you still need the container. I really love this point by Mark, which is you still need this container because actually this container allows things to reconstitute. And this is one of the reasons.
How does the container manifest though?
It gets manifest in the locality again. So Chad's in the Chad the Alcoholics in the chat room, and I think AA is a great example because there are better and worse AA chapters. And I'm sure people, let's say, who move around a lot, the AA group in Portland was wonderful. And the AA group in Kansas City is not as good. You have all of this stuff. But there's an essence to it that holds it together. And let's say that the church on the corner that's dying or has trouble or whatever, it can be reformed because the Reformation is possible. From the container, they can access it and sort of pull it down and try to re-instantiate it again. Last time we were talking about, Mark had this really, I thought it was a terrific point that if you're going, part of the reason we were talking about Rick Ripetti's interview with John Vervaeke and how Rick Ripetti's little church sort of breaks up. And one of the weaknesses there is that they don't have the big container like you have in Christianity with Jesus, that actually allows a little container to break up and then to have it hopefully not only productively, but also something with a possibility of advancement, reinstantiate in another place and actually be able to not only continue a personal narrative, but to be able to continue a collective global. I just finished recording a video on proximal versus ultimate betterment and some of those things. I don't know if I'm going to put that out tomorrow or Monday. I haven't decided yet. So that's what we were talking about before. And I'm not sure if, Nick, that was what you wanted to jump in on. Now, you're also known here, probably, you never asked for me to name you. I guess I'm sort of like Donald Trump in that way. I called you For Cult Nick because, of course, you said you were a member.
Fair enough.
You were a member of 4 cults. And then when I told my wife that, she said, and now he's listening to you. So.
It's number 5 right there.
So go for it, Nick.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I guess where my mind was going with that discussion initially, and I think it does tie in to Mark's point, granted in a way that's not immediately obvious, but where my mind went when I was listening to the Rick and Vervaeke discussion was how distinctly Gnostic both of them came off. And this, I think, was most exemplified in Rick's describing his position after having his social system collapse, right? He was describing it as he was up high on this ladder and the ladder was falling apart. He could, in some sense, see the top of the mountain, but he did not have the skill, which I think this is how he described it. And I think it's important that he described it this way, to navigate the rest of the climb up that ladder to actually arrive at the top of the mountain. That gets contrasted with Vervaeke's telling of his kind of initial mystical experience through the Platonic forms, which I thought was actually really important for contextualizing Vervaeke, because he doesn't use, emptiness or nothingness, right? Buddhist terms to describe it. Instead, he uses form to describe it. And it got me thinking about my own plethora of various mystical experiences, and how what was so bizarre, I suppose, about the specific set of experiences that turned me towards Christianity was that the manner in which I experienced form, and right, you could use Pageauian patterning, or right, something that is structured, was largely the feeling. And the way I interpreted it in that moment was very distinctly as united within a person. And I don't know a better word for it than person, right? It's not quite right. It's not as limited as we normally imagine a person to be. It had an aspect of feeling like it was the place from which all personhood comes forth, right? All structure that's structured in such... Oh, yeah, lots of words. How do I put it more simply? I'll jump back. So what kind of arrived to my mind listening to that conversation was basically that I started getting this understanding that when a person has a mystical experience lacking the sense of personhood on the other side, right? The other is a person. You kind of end up defaulting towards one of two directions. And we generally describe it as Gnostic, or we describe it as solipsistic. So if you're coming from an emergent place, much like I think Rick was in that conversation, you end up describing the mystical experience in solipsistic terms. And I think that when you come from that emergent pathway, you do describe your failings at being able to deal with that in terms of skill, which is you're the person, and the thing that you're dealing with is not a person. And the only way to deal with something that is not a person is through skillful means, right? Technique. On the flip side, you have Vervaeke's experience, where he's describing these Platonic forms, and you get something that's much more Gnostic in its orientation, or emanationist, as opposed to emergent, where he is able to partake in some sense of this perfection to which he does not belong, right? It's perfect spheres, perfect shapes, perfection, right? And he's trying to adapt himself into that mystical space that is too clean for him to exist there, right? And you start getting this Gnostic feeling from the mode. And what the train of thought that this all got me going on is how absolutely necessary for a transjective, I'll use a Vervaekean term because I think it's important to his project. Also, I think it's useful contextually. To have a transjective relationship, I'm more convinced than ever that a requirement for it is for there to be two or more persons, right? You need to be relating as a person. You don't get to view yourself from the emergent perspective as a bundle of something that isn't person. And likewise, on the other side, the thing that you are communicating or interacting with must necessarily also be viewed in terms of person. Yeah. And I don't want to overly limit that word, right? Because I think it really does expand far beyond how we normally experience personhood. But that's where my mind went with that conversation. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that was really good, though, because, I mean, in Christianity, how you just laid it out now was really helpful, because in Christianity, God draws us towards him. And when you look at, for example, C.S. Lewis's description about pantheism, that's exactly where Lewis says pantheism fails, because what if you discover that the thing on the other side is not just a realm of potentiality waiting for your personhood to assert will and intention and rationality towards it in order to exploit it, sort of like a virgin land.
Right.
But rather, in fact, something is hunting you. And that and then the difference of the difference of posture with respect to a lot of these psychedelic experiences, Christians tend to be on the side of don't play with this because there are living things on the other side of the door. Whereas if your assumption is that human beings are the only agents around, well, that's just a door. Let's go through the door, and it's a new world that we can now exploit and explore or whatever. And
it's going to open you up. Yeah,
that's right.
Right. And I think so. That's sort of the difference. I think I was pointing out with the Jesus container metaphor, right? Where so there's a difference between Vervaeke's transjective, so we'll grant him the word, and transformation, but not the way Vervaeke talks about it. But there is a difference, and the difference, I think Nick has nailed it perfectly. He always does. That's one of the reasons I don't like him that much. He always makes me look bad. Yeah, it's that person to person, right? Because person to thing relationship can never result in the proper transformation.
Right. And we know that in terms of our transformations, and Vervaeke talks about that with agape. Because the mother pulls via agape, the mother brings the potential of personhood from that baby into the world. That's all of our development. And Peterson, when he's talking about developmental psychology, that mothers and parents tend to, they're in that realm of proximal development that, and we do it. We don't even know we're doing it. We're talking at just another level to not lose the toddler, but let the toddler continue to leverage our personhood and to draw us into it. And that's, I think, whereas I think you really nailed it, Nick. The other idea is that, I need more skills. You really nailed that. That's super helpful.
Or drugs. Skills or drugs. More material, more skills, whatever. Yeah, you're stuck in the propositional and the procedural, and you can't get out of those two. So when Vervaeke talks about, no, we're stuck in the propositional, no, we're stuck in the propositional procedural, right? But then you're switching to our model, to the 4 Ps model I talked about with you, Paul, and with Karen Wong on the meaning code. That's a slightly different model for that reason, because it recognizes where we're stuck as propositional procedural.
Right, it's stuck in skillful means, right? Yes. It is humanity is the basis of all personhood. And thus, anything that we do must be through skillful means. We've lost that relationality that's fundamental. Right? I don't think it's an accident that you have lines in the Bible like where 2 or more are collected, there you will find the Holy Spirit. I'm paraphrasing. That's not how it goes, but it's something like that. I think that's important. And the kind of reverence that I see with Vervaeke when referencing the transjective very much brings to mind that feeling that seems to be captured in the Holy Spirit. Why is there something special about 2 persons being collected? Right? It seems like it opens up something else, right? A different way of relating to the system. And again, I can speak from my own experience that I've taken a lot of psychedelics. I've done them in excess of 30, 40 times, in various doses, kind of all along the spectrum. And it's not like I'm foreign to these experiences. However, I've also had an extended mystical state that was not induced by any drugs. And there was something very particularly different about it. And it was distinctly the perception of person on the other end. And, I can go further with that. I don't think it just has to be person, but there's a different relationship that occurs, I think, when you have that type of experience.
is the word person more accurate, or is the word human more accurate? Was it an
Person.
individual, like an individual being was on the other end for you?
Individual.
And
Yeah, I don't think
I-
human is the right term, because the experience extends far beyond the normal limit. It was not bound in a physical manner in the way that a human is. However, despite the fact that it was unlimited, it very much gave the sense of personness. And I don't know quite how to describe it other than, this kind of apophatic attempt, right? What it wasn't.
Well, I have a thought on the power between two. We both have microphones and speakers. And when we connect, there's this possibility that if your speaker, I think you all know the problem I'm describing, when you can hear everyone else echoing and the volume just keeps exponentially rising to the point of that whistle, and it's ear piercing. There's something about there's two creators co-creating that's different than just one creator with sort of a plain environment. I don't know. You could maybe work off that.
Yeah, the feedback is not there, right? Because you have the adjustment of the other individual, right? And so in one way, you might be looking at, quote, the same thing, or maybe the same form, if we want to go Platonic, just to be in the Vervaeke frame, but you have two different perspectives. And so you get back into which side of the elephant are you on, right? And it's having the different sides of the elephant in that case that does the co-creation. Because if you're just seeing the front of the elephant, you're going, yeah, front of the elephant, and then you're hearing front of the elephant. I like that feedback metaphor, Ian. That's really good.
Yeah. And it does, again, yeah, I agree. That's a great metaphor. To me, it's, again, kind of picking up on that solipsistic effect, right? When I'm talking, I don't know, there's something off when I imagine that every time I'm talking to somebody and I'm creating something with them, through this mutual sharing and understanding, it feels really gross to imagine that what I'm actually doing is projecting you and having a conversation with myself. That there's no legitimate novelty there, or no legitimate synthesis. That feels wrong to me. For lack, I don't know if that makes a good argument, but
I'm thinking about Wilson from the Tom Hanks movie.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sure someone else has made that example.
Yeah, that's a distinct lack of intimacy, and this sort of hints to the thing that I think is actually causing the meaning crisis in some sense, is the intimacy crisis, our inability to be intimate with one another, right? And why? Because we've lost submission. Well, why have we lost submission? Because we don't like the big container. We're not going to submit to that. And it's like, well, there's no reason to submit to anything else ultimately. But of course, you have to co-create. So you go into communities, and then the communities have a problem, whatever that problem is, and then they break up. But there's no larger container. So the no larger container, as I pointed out earlier, or perhaps not strongly enough, you can't fix the community either. Like maybe the community doesn't blow up if you've got the Jesus container to point to fix the community, because communities that are self-referential are going to blow up and not be able to be put back together again, which is what happened to Rick. Whereas the community, a good community, points past itself to an ideal it can't embody.
Right.
And it's the ideal it can't embody that allows it to repair itself. It's not flawless, right? It's still churches still break up, Paul, right, Pastor Paul? Right?
Every day.
But they can reform. And the thing Rick complained about was not the breakup, but it was the fact that nothing formed in its place that could replace it. And that's the thing that the Christians have, even though they're not viewing the Jesus container. I hope I'm not going to burn in hell for this, but oh well.
No, not for this.
Anyway. For everything else, probably. Right. But that's important, because it's not just that you can move to a new church, but it's that the church can repair itself potentially, or even make corrections long before it blows up, hopefully, right? Like God willing, right?
Yep.
As my Orthodox Jewish friend says all the time, God willing.
Right.
He's not allowed to say that.
That was perfect, Mark. Perfect.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. Good. That was super helpful. That was super helpful.
Interesting sort of intimacy and community we're talking about. It seems to me like that's exactly the big problem that we're having, right? That's what you're saying. On sort of a personal level, I've noticed that people are having a harder and harder time, it seems, imagining intimate relationships that don't go all the way into the sexual territory. I don't know how salient that is in this scenario, but that's just what popped into my head. I've recently been interacting with a lot of people. If they read a comic book that's about two men who have a deep friendship, turns out that they're gay. If people read about an older person and a younger person, it just keeps going into that territory. And that seems like a massive cultural wave that's happening. And I'm wondering, what do people lose when that's the framework?
Wow.
Like, where is the space for friendship?
What a great point. What
That's
a great
an awesome point. That's
Yeah.
so that goes to Vervaeke's having versus being mode, right? And I have my disagreements with that, right? It's correct. It's incomplete. So if you don't have a being mode relationship with other people because of an intimacy problem, we'll say, then you're just going to relate to them as having mode creatures, right? You're never going to get to the point where you're relating to them as in the being mode. So that's very prescient, in my opinion. That's dead on.
I have to briefly point out the symbolism happens of Paul's battery exhausted moment there.
It works. It's online.
Keep talking. Keep talking.
He's on YouTube. I can see him.
I got to
YouTube.
fix
He's
this.
just missing the Discord square.
Keep talking.
Okay.
Which looks really weird. So yeah, no, I think that's an excellent observation. That is dead on. I think when you combine that with having versus being mode, what you're coming up with is you're coming up with the intimacy crisis causing a having mode only relationship with everything around you. And so you're falling into materialism effectively. And then you can go back to the Four Horsemen conversation and look at Bishop Barron saying we flatten the church. Well, the flattening was due to something that came before the flattening. And I think it's that same underlying problem of falling into materialism because we've lost the mystical, right? And that goes back into what's everybody looking for with drugs? What's everybody looking for? What's the problem everyone's trying to solve? The problem everyone's trying to solve is a problem, roughly speaking, of enchantment. Everybody wants enchantment back because it's been removed from the world and they don't have a container to put it in. They need that Jesus container in order to get that to get that done. And it's the lack of intimacy, I think, that's caused all these collapses to happen.
Well, and I'll throw in as well, Ewan, to your I think actually to both you and Mark's points, it seems like there's a type of corruption of the categories. So almost what I picked up from what you were describing was a type of desperation for intimacy. And in that desperation, we go to the least common denominator. Well, if I keep breaking all the boundaries, I have to run into intimacy at some point.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And because you think if you break down every single structure, that's all that's left to find is yourself. Turns out that's not really how people work.
Right.
You break down all the structures, all that you find is nothing.
Nothing. Right. And it really is ironic. And in the kind of desperate plea to make something work, it seems like we are in some sense throwing the dirt on our own grave, which is that in this attempt to reestablish intimacy in our human connections, we end up making it so that, right, to Joey's point, all we realize is our lack of intimacy, right? So what ends up happening is those moments that are supposed to be deeply intimate, now we suddenly are starting to go, well, is sex that intimate? Is there something here? Or is it just, the last boundary I have to break?
Well, go ahead. We've been breaking it on the other side. I mean, pornography is just the inverse of it. It's all sex and no intimacy, and in fact, it's the idea that article that I've read a number of times in my videos from the New York Times, where this guy is, he's asking permission at every little movement, and then he ghosts her, and she's like, well, there's a telos to sexuality, which is intimacy, and once it's divorced from it, there has to be, in any kind of relationship. I love how you opened this up though, Nick, because it's not techne. When you're married a long time and you begin to, you're just always sort of like this with the other person. Once, in a sense, a couple can have a joke about how you've sort of got the other one mapped, but just like with marketplaces, which are full of people, once you have a map and once you reveal, oh, I've got you mapped, well, they're going to change and undo the map. And that's because there's watching going both ways. And so, again, I see it more the spirit of finesse, which is it's relational.
Well, and I wanted to point out, you brought up going the other way as well. That's exactly where I was also trying to go, is that by going to this least common denominator, so too have we destroyed the potential for intimacy that is not sexual.
Yes. And
that's a great loss.
Yes.
Like, that's a very big loss.
Yes.
More so, I would say, than the eventual loss of that least common denominator. If you're breaking the fabric down by which people find value in their social relationships to begin with. And,
But once you can't find anything new in a system, once it loses novelty, you're tumbling towards nihilism, right? It may take a long time, but you'll get there. And the reintroducing of novelty is the reintroduction of the mystic, of the mystical. That's the re-enchantment. Enchantment is novelty. In a materialist world, you can't have novelty because everything is knowable. Even if it isn't known, it's knowable. And that's only going to lead you to nihilism eventually. Now, you may grow old and die before you hit the nihilism, granted, but maybe not. And I think that's the world we're living in. And then if you couch it, and I like all the couching so far, but if you couch it in having versus being, there's no point in being mode if you're not reaching out past materiality. There's no being in material. Right. Once you're, so once the telos is gone, in essence, right, everything can be defined as material. But now there's no being mode available to you, right? And then I would, my argument is it's, John says, well, I like the word becoming better, being instead of being. He says, so it's having mode and becoming mode. It's like, no, because there's a way in which you can get stuck in being mode. Right. So you go from relationship to relationship to relationship to stay in love every 6 months or 9 months, however long your love lasts. So that doesn't cut it. But what does cut it is to say, oh, well, there has to be having mode, being mode, and becoming mode. But how do I become? I have to break down my axioms again, right? Well, if I do that, I need a place to do that. It can't just be a community. Right, because communities can corrupt, and if I do that in the middle, right, I'm dead. Right, I could get devastated. Something like what Rick Rapetti sort of almost described happening to him, right? Because he came all the way out, went back into drugs, basically, right? So you need that Jesus container, that larger container again, to have people help you in an intimate connection, and you have an intimate connection up. So you're not just relying on the horizontal intimate connections, because that, I think, is where Vervaeke falls short. He talks about horizontal connections, but he's not talking about the vertical connection up and out. He talks about emanation, right? But he's not taking seriously the emanations drawing you forth, as you so brilliantly put it there, Pastor Paul, right? It's drawing you forth and up to become something that is more capable than you were before. So you don't get stuck in being mode, just taking some acid or some mushrooms or whatever over and over again once a year to have that enchantment, that temporary enchantment that doesn't bring transformations. Maybe it brings the transjective or shows you the transjective, but you're the same person.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that novelty thing really stands out to me. I think recently people have been searching for novelty almost entirely on the horizontal plane and neither up nor down. People don't seem to want to go deep into things.
Yeah.
And I actually, interestingly enough, wrote a sonnet about this the other day on the bus. Would it be okay if I read that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Please.
Okay, now I doubt I have good performance ability, so I'm just going to apologize in advance. But here we go. O novelty, why do we seek for you only in that which is not yet made ours? Why can we not seek to our first loves be true? Oops, I messed that line up. Why do we look for that which by the hours grows old and dies, and not to that which lives eternally? Behold, a single tree can more of beauty and of wisdom give than can 10,000 flowers viewed hastily. O novelty, we have even to you proved false, and would not know your truest charms. So if you are willing to wait patiently to learn what is most beautiful and true, the fruit found in a lifelong lover's arms is more novel than infidelity.
Wow.
Wow, that was great.
Are you
That
married?
was great.
Great.
It was
Yes, I am.
so on point in the
Calvinism all over the
conversation
place.
too. Oh man.
What you don't-
Calvinism confirmed, Paul. You happy now?
What's that?
Calvinism confirmed. He wrote that, and then we had this conversation. What's going on?
I am a member of a CRC.
Well, yeah, what you guys don't know is he writes 500 sonnets on the bus every day about everything.
I wish.
They're all
I
banging
could
just like that.
The law of long silence.